All right, hello and welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. If you have any questions throughout the meeting or throughout the webinar, go ahead and put them in the chat. I've got it open. I'll be keeping an eye out on it. Let me know if you have any issues hearing me or seeing the presentation. But thank you for joining us for Intro to Spring Wildflowers today. So to start out, because we talk a lot about spring ephemerals, especially around this time of year, but what is a spring ephemeral? So that word ephemeral just means lasting a very short time. So these are plants that show up just in that little window of time at the very beginning of the season. They are intentionally maximizing on using up all of that sunlight that is getting through through the forest canopy before all of the trees and shrubs leaf out. So at the beginning of the season, so in March and April, about 50% of the sun that's available makes it all the way down to the forest floor. By mid-May, that'll reduce to about 10 to 15% with all of the leaves on the trees. We have 64 species of common spring ephemerals in Ohio. We do have 5 rare species. And we'll dive into just a handful that you're likely to see around this region. First things first, though, what are the enemies of spring wildflowers? What are their problems that they have to face? One of their biggest threats right now are invasive plants. Like I said, they are intentionally using that very beginning of the season to get sunlight because they're very tiny. They're at the bottom of the forest. But when you have these invasive plants that are flowering out or leafing out earlier than our native plants do, that uses up sunlight. So bush honeysuckle is a big one that it grows very thick. It's this top picture here, or this left picture here. It grows very, very thick. It spreads far, and it completely blocks sunlight from getting to the forest floor. It also will put out some chemicals to change the pH of the soil around it, which is an additional little challenge, but the main thing is that it is blocking out that sunlight that otherwise they'd be getting. The other big invasive plant that they have to contend with is lesser celandine. Lesser celandine are those super cute little happy yellow flowers that you see starting right about now every year, and they will completely cover the forest floor. It was brought over as a ornamental because it's cute and pretty. And it really does work as a ground cover, but it just works a little too well, and it will completely coat the ground, and it will compete with our native wildflowers for some resources. On the flip side of that, using pesticides and herbicides can also be a big problem for our spring ephemerals. We'll go through as we're kind of going through our individual species, but a lot of our spring ephemerals are pollinated by insects that you wouldn't otherwise expect. And so by, trying to eliminate some what we might consider pests, we can actually be causing some problems and be taking away their helpers. So those early pollinators are absolutely essential to our spring ephemerals. But also using fertilizer. Overuse of fertilizer in your gardens, on your lawns, all of that excess will run off and can get into the waterways, can really mess with the balance of the soil. So always, before you use any like fertilizer, I recommend getting a soil test kit. You can pick them up at any garden store. Test and see, what are the nutrient levels of your soil. Do you even need fertilizer? Because a lot of times you actually don't. You don't have to add fertilizer every time you plant something. So those are just a little handful of the challenges that our spring ephemerals might face. All right, let's dive in. So we're going to go kind of by color. So to start off, we've got Blue-Eyed Mary here on the left. To me, they kind of look like they're wearing pants. I think they got their name because these look like, two blue eyes. Blue-eyed Mary will bloom mid-April through early May. So it's got a relatively short bloom time. Usually you'll see these on floodplains, like very wooded floodplains, and then on the lower slopes of mature woods. They are an annual, so they only last for a year. They are completely reliant on the seeds from the previous year. So even though they only bloom in the early spring, they will, produce those seeds. Those seeds lay dormant throughout the summer. They're just kind of hanging out, and then they will actually germinate in the fall. They are able to self-pollinate, but most of their pollination is done by very tiny early bees. Common blue violets are ones that you'll see everywhere here soon. These guys start early April. They'll last through late May. You might see them in your lawns. You might see them around your garden. You'll see them pretty much in any forest. They're very, very tolerant of disturbance. They are actually, I feel like they're one that can get overlooked, but they do have some cool things about them. They're the host to the caterpillars of a few different species of fritillary butterflies, which are some really pretty butterflies that you get to see in the summer. And they like to lay their eggs and have their larvae feed on common blue violets in the springtime. These guys can hybridize with other species of violet. So you'll see different colorations of them. There's a yellow violet. I've seen some white violets. There's a hybrid that you may have seen that it'll be mostly white and it'll have some like almost bluish purple kind of streaks in it. And this is a perennial, so they will come back year after year. They reside in little tubers in the ground. We've got dwarf crested iris, which is in the iris family. We have a native iris. We actually have a handful of native irises here to Ohio. Same thing, these guys are mid-April to late May. So they kind of pop up a little bit later in the season. You'll see them in anywhere that has like rich soil. They like to be on like stream terraces or like the kind of lower part of a slope. They're not typically in those uplands, but they will actually form colonies. So they grow from rhizomes, and they can kind of spread out those rhizomes underneath the soil and form these little patches. They are very good ground cover because of that, because they form these patches. They're very, very common in like the eastern half of the state. So if you go east a little bit, you'll see these a lot. They are seen occasionally in the western half of the state. And if there's any of these species that you're like, ooh, I want to see that one in person, I highly recommend using iNaturalist. It's a website. You don't even have to have an account. You can just go on there. They have an explore tab, and you can type in what species you're looking for, and it'll show you where it's been seen in your area. And it'll show you, when it was seen. So if it was something that was seen 10 years ago, maybe it's still there, maybe not. But if you're like, oh, they were seeing that last year, then there's a good chance you'll get to go see it. Then we have dwarf larkspur, which forms these really cool kind of stalks with all these flowers on them. These guys you'll see early April through late May. They like really rich, leaf littery parts of the forest. They like to have a lot of decomposition happening around them. Usually you'll actually find them with a bunch of other ephemerals. So they like to they're social. They like to be in a group. And you can mostly in this picture, it is a lot of dwarf larkspur but there's a couple little like other flowers you can kind of see at the bottom there. They don't usually kind of monoculture like that. Inside of them, they have two poisonous alkaloids, two poisonous substances that make them toxic to cattle and to humans. So if you have cattle, or if you have, humans in your life that are prone to putting plants in their mouths, they're not necessarily fatal, but they will give you a tummy ache. Maybe, keep an eye out around this time of year. With another interesting thing about them that I did not realize is that while they have a lot of pollinators that will visit them. I mean, from bees, butterflies, all of the things. Because of this flower is so tubular, only ruby-throated hummingbirds and queen bumblebees are able to actually successfully pollinate them, just because of the shape. So they are very specific, and that's why it's important to support our pollinators as well, so that we continue to have these beautiful flowers. Jacob's ladder, named because that it's got these opposite leaves going up that kind of look like a ladder. These guys, same thing, early April through late May. They like to be where it's a little wetter, so around streams, where there's a lower slope where it kind of stays a little wet. This is where it's important to use the scientific name when you are doing it, I mean, if you're just talking about it colloquially, totally fine. But if you are doing any sort of in-depth study or being a little more scientific about them, Jacob's ladder is also sometimes called Greek valerian. Greek valerian is a common name that is shared by Polemonium vanbrudii, which is another type of flower that does not occur in Ohio. It is a northeastern flower. So common names can be shared, but scientific names are always unique. So it does have a cousin that shares its name, its common name. So yeah, you might be talking to a friend in Vermont and you think you're talking about the same plant. Virginia bluebells are iconic, honestly. You'll see these starting in early April. They usually last through early May. They have a very brief time. And as soon as they bloom, they start to wither. Or as soon as they finish blooming, they start to wither. So they don't really last very long past that bloom. But they've got these beautiful wide leaves that are almost like dandelion-like, or sometimes they remind me of like lamb's ear, just less fuzzy, just those wide flat leaves. They're found pretty much anywhere. They do like it. They do tolerate moisture a little bit better. They do prefer a little moisture. So if you're near a creek or a river or stream, you might see some more bluebells. They do have a very rare white flowered form, which I've never seen, but now I want to. So if anyone sees a white bluebell this year, let me know where it is. These guys, similar to the larkspur, they are dependent on any, like bumblebees, any bee that has a long tongue, or like butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, anything that has like either a long tongue or a long bill to be able to get all the way to the bottom, because that's where the nectar is stored. Pink lady slipper is one of our native orchids. This one it's not super common. I've seen it a couple of times, but we do actually have 46 species of orchids that are native to Ohio. They're all beautiful and amazing. But pink lady slipper, you'll see late April through mid-May is when it will bloom. They like dry, acidic soils, and they like to be in the upland. So anywhere that you're at the top of a hill and there's a lot of acidity in the soil, it's a decent chance of finding pink lady slipper. They are primarily pollinated by bumblebees, and it actually is a specific relationship with how the flower has formed that specifically bumblebees are able to pollinate them. And this relationship was actually written about by Charles Darwin in his book On the Origin of Species. So some really cool relationships there that are kind of iconic and historic. We've got purple cress, which is one of the coolest ones, I think, to see. It always makes me happy. These guys are pretty early. You'll start seeing these mid-March, so just a couple weeks from now, even potentially even next week. And they're usually done by mid-April. So these are an early season flower. They like rich woods. They like woods that have kind of been left to thrive. They are tolerant of some disturbance, but not a lot. So you're not going to see them as one of the first plants to be coming back after there's been, you know, a logging or some sort of clear cutting of a forest. They grow from tubers. So they have little teeny tiny tubers in the soil underneath. And one of the easiest ways, besides, you know, just kind of seeing the leaves, their leaves have these little sharp points at the very base. But they have 4 petals on their flowers. So if you see a white, kind of purple, usually more white than it is purple, flower with 4 petals, it's a pretty decent chance that that's purple cress. Spring beauties are an iconic one. They have pink pollen, which I think is just super fun. They are late March to early May, so just in a few weeks we'll start to see spring beauties coming up. These pink lines are what we call nectar guides. So they're almost like little landing strips, like there's the nectar, come over here. And you will see them pretty much anywhere. They will take over a lawn. I mean, I would love to see every lawn look like this in the spring. I think that would be so pretty. But yeah, they're very tolerant of lawns, fields, pastures, disturbance. They'll hang around, and they're very short. They don't get very tall. So maybe that's why they're able to go anywhere. They have a bee, a species of mining bee, that specializes in pollinating just spring beauties. So they are the only flower that this bee will pollinate. And they do have there are other bees and even some flies that will pollinate them. But this mining bee, it's Andrena erigeniae, that bee will only pollinate spring beauty. Toadshade is one of our trilliums. I've also heard it called sessile trillium after its species name. Trillium is a family of flowers that are named because that they have 3 petals or 3 leaves and 3 petals. So try. They will bloom early April to mid-May. You'll see them in the woods. You're not really going to see these guys out in a field. And they are pretty tolerant of disturbance. They can handle it. Occasionally you'll see a yellow flowered variant. Really the defining feature of a toadshade is this kind of speckly leaf, the kind of mottled leaf. Wild geranium is another, here we're getting into like pinks, reds, maroons. For some reason, botanists seem to ignore the color purple when they're sorting things by color. So I would call wild geraniums more of a purple than a pink or red or maroon, but that's just me. Wild geraniums bloom mid-April through mid-May. They are in like nutrient-rich woodlands. So anywhere there's a lot of leaf litter, again, they'll hang out. They can get up to 2 feet tall with their flowers, so they'll put their blooms up a little bit higher. And the fruit that they produce looks almost like a long beak, which will give them the nickname sometimes of crane's bill. So if you've ever heard of crane's bill, same thing as wild geranium. They are a big food source for early bees, for wasps, for beetles. I think that a lot of times, like bees and butterflies and hummingbirds get all the credit for being pollinators. But many wasps, once they're adults, are solely pollinators. They are mainly predators when they're in their juvenile stage. Um, and a lot of beetles can also be pollinators, especially early in the spring. And these guys also have a specialist mining bee, Andrena distans. Only pollinates wild geranium. Then we have wild blue phlox. These early April through late May, you'll see that's a very common span. That's kind of the peak time to go out and see as many wildflowers as you can. These guys you'll see in woodlands. They are pretty tolerant of disturbance. So you'll even see them if you've had a patch that had, a patch of woodlands that's been cut out. These guys will start to come back pretty early. And you'll see them in young woodlands as well. They have this long tube at the base of their flower. You can't really, don't have a good angle on it in this photo, but this long tube will select only for pollinators that have long tongues. And because of these guys bloom a little bit later in the season, they will get butterflies as a pollinator, especially swallowtails. So if you get a good patch of wild blue phlox, you'll probably see some swallowtail butterflies visiting. Golden ragwort, they are in the sunflower family. So they are composite flowers. So that means you've got these petals, and then every one of these little bits in the middle are their own flower. So one flower with a lot of tiny flowers in it. These guys you're going to see late March through May. Obviously, we're getting into the yellows now. Usually they like very, not quite wetland, but like moist woodlands. So where it stays a little bit wetter, but it's not quite like soggy soil. And they are a host plant for a couple of moth species. So if there's a couple moths that will only lay their eggs on golden ragwort, their larvae will munch away on the leaves. And you will sometimes see golden ragwort along roadways. They kind of stand out when you do see them because they are beautiful and bright yellow and very tall. As you can see, their flowers end up way above the actual leaves of the plant. And their leaves can look pretty similar to both violet leaves and if you're familiar with garlic mustard, which is another invasive plant, their leaves can kind of look like that. But they're a little more kind of flat on the bottom at the base of the leaf there. Marsh marigold. These are, again, they're not super common here in Southwest Ohio. There are reports of them in a few different places, so you have a chance of finding them. These bloom early April through mid-May, so they are an earlier flower. They like swampy woods, but not, you're not going to find them in the middle of the pond. You might find them in standing water up to like maybe 3 or 4 inches deep, but not really beyond that. But you'll see little teeny tiny bees and butterflies as their pollinators. They're a particular favorite of hair streak butterflies. They also have hoverflies as well that like to pollinate them. So lots of visitors for our little marsh marigolds. They do also make a good ground cover if you're interested in planting them yourself. So if you have, a rain garden or an area that stays pretty moist, these can be a cute little ground cover for the spring. Wood poppy, also sometimes called celandine poppy. These bloom early April through early May. You'll usually see them in, pretty nutrient-rich woods on moist slopes. We have a spot in one of our parks where we have I think it's an oak tree that fell down quite a few years ago. I'd say probably at least a decade ago. But that root ball has it's almost like a little stepped planter. But there are wood poppies that I always find every year growing in the root ball. Um, they are one of 2 species of native poppies to Ohio, and we will meet the other one here in a minute. But yeah, they're occasionally called celandine poppy, which I think is a little confusing with lesser celandine. So I prefer to call them wood poppy to make things a little more clear. Yellow trout lily are one of those that you will see in, if you see it, you'll either see one or you will see a giant patch of them. There's not really an in between, it seems, with yellow trout lily. These guys will start here in a few weeks, here in late March. They'll go through late April, so they don't really last super late in the season. But they like really nutrient-rich soil. They like to be in the forest. They do have a, so yellow trout lily is listed as state endangered. They are officially endangered. There is a more common white trout lily that you'll see. But the yellow trout lilies are just so pretty. I couldn't help but talk about them instead. But one of the defining features, because a lot of times when they're young, they'll take a couple of years to actually form a bloom. So you'll see the young ones with just a leaf up out of the ground. So they've got these kind of spotty leaves that are very elongated with a nice taper off at the tip. Getting into the whites and the greens, which is the bulk of our colors. We'll start off with bloodroot, which is a mid-March through mid-April, so very early. Should be seeing it here soon. This is our other poppy. So you can see a similarity in the leaves between bloodroot and the wood poppy and kind of how the leaves are formed. They are sometimes tolerant of disturbance, but they prefer a more established woodland. They're called bloodroot because that in their roots there's like a they've got these juices that will be can be like a very bright orange red color. That can also be used as a dye. It has been used as a dye in the past. And there are some medicinal properties attributed to bloodroot that are said to help with a few different like lung conditions and also to help reduce fevers. And they also produce an alkaloid that is used commercially in mouthwash and toothpaste. It combats plaque. So very useful little flower as well as being very pretty. Cut leaf toothwort. It's called that because it looks like somebody took a pair of scissors to the leaves. Just cut them up. But these guys are very early. They might be blooming within the next week. They are in early March to April. They don't last very late in the season. They like very rich woods. They can tolerate some disturbance, but not a lot. These are, because they bloom so early in the season, they are like one of the first sources of nectar or of food for pollinators. And they are specifically a very important food plant for the falcate orange tip and West Virginia white caterpillars, which eventually turn into butterflies. So those are some of our first emerging caterpillars in the springtime, and they love that cut leaf toothwort, and it's very important that they have it in order to eat. We've got some drooping or nodding trillium. I've heard it called both. And it's called that because the flowers droop underneath the leaves. But again, you can see 3 leaves, 3 petals. They will bloom mid-April through mid-May. And they like undisturbed woods. They don't really tolerate disturbance very well. A lot of times if you're just kind of hiking along, you might even miss the flowers because they can be very tucked underneath the leaves. But their primary pollinators are bees, yellow jackets, flies, gnats. They're pretty general. But yeah, they'll get a pretty good amount of pollinators visiting them. And they are the host plant for the black-patched Clepsis moth. So again, a moth that will only lay its eggs and its larvae on this plant. False Solomon seal, and we'll talk about true Solomon seal here in a moment. False Solomon seal is a little more common. It blooms late April through May. They prefer nutrient-rich woods, so pretty established woodlands. It's sometimes called Solomon's plume. So you may have heard them called that, but they're actually in the lily family of flowers. And they have this one cluster of flowers at the top, and then this kind of ladder-like leaf arrangement. True Solomon seal has this little marching of these, kind of tubular flowers along the actual stem of the plant. So true Solomon seal blooms April through May. It is pretty uncommon in Ohio. It needs like nutrient-rich, well-established, moist woods. So you're more likely to see it kind of more towards like, not quite in bogs, but in that kind of vein of habitat. But they have a rhizome, just like a potato, a little tuber that is edible and has been traditionally used as kind of like a potato substitute or a potato-like food. I'm not sure how big their rhizomes are. I've never seen them, so I don't know if they're like, okay, you got to have, a whole handful of them to make up for one potato. Another fruit-bearing plant that we have are mayaples. Mayaples will, the leaves you'll start seeing in April, and then every year they bloom like in the first week of May. It is like clockwork. There was one year, it was a couple years ago, I'd hiked on April 30th and there were no mayapple blooms, and then I hiked again on May 1st and there were mayapple blooms. And I was like, wow, they read the calendar, I think. But they prefer wooded habitats. They are pretty persistent in disturbance. So if you're trying to, establish a garden somewhere, if anybody's cutting back a portion of woods, if we're trying to build a new trail, usually that's our battle, they stick around for a while. It takes them a while to kind of move away. They produce an edible fruit that hangs below. So their flowers will hang below their leaves. If you want to find the flower or the fruit, you'll look for one of the plants that has two leaves coming up. So they'll either have one big leaf or two big leaves, and only the ones that have the two big leaves will produce a flower and then a fruit. And so that is their, the older stage of that plant. They don't produce nectar in their flowers, so they are not as concerned with like doing sexual reproduction as they are with just spreading. So they will spread via rhizomes, and then within that fruit, they have lots of little seeds, and the primary seed disperser of their little green fruit that hangs down are box turtles. And the mayaples are edible. The fruits are actually edible. I have not tasted one yet. I did collect one last year to offer to our ambassador box turtle, and I should have kept half of it for myself because he took one bite and didn't like it. So he doesn't agree with wild box turtles in their preference for the mayapple fruits. Large flowered trillium. This is our state native wildflower for Ohio. They bloom early April through mid-May. You'll see them in like well-established woods, and you'll usually find them with a group of other wildflowers. They don't like to be by themselves. And they change color as they get older. So they used to be thought to be two different species of trillium, that there was one that bloomed early in the spring, early in the season, and the one that bloomed later in the season. But they turn pink as they get older. Now it is possible, especially for large flower trillium, occasionally, very, very rarely, but occasionally you'll see a quadrillium where they'll have 4 leaves and 4 petals. One of the biggest challenges for large flowered trilliums is that white-tailed deer think that they are delicious. And so they do tend to get eaten a little more often than some of our other wildflowers. And one of their major seed dispersers are ants. So even ants play a role with our spring ephemerals. One of our fun ones are Jack in the Pulpit. This flower can either be this, beautiful striped purple and green, or it can just be a solid green. You'll see these late March through May, so they last a little while in the season. You'll see them in well-established wooded habitats. So this outside part is called the spathe, and their true flower is hiding way down at the bottom. And they are stinky because their pollinators are flies. And so if you get up and sniff one, they smell gross. But the flies love them. And they will produce these bright red berries later in the season. And so, usually you'll see them in like June, like it'll be solidly into summer before you're seeing their fruits. And it's just a nice little reminder of like, oh, yes, that really cool flower was here. These two are 2 of our tricksters. So we've got squirrel corn and Dutchman's breeches. Squirrel corn blooms April through May. They like moist to well-drained wooded soils. Because of weird flower shape, they are primarily pollinated by bumblebees. So they've got that, long tube shape, so you need a long tongue to be able to get in there. Their seeds are dispersed by ants. They form these little bulbs. And then we also have Dutchman's breeches, or if you're me, you call them Dutchman's breeches. I was very disappointed to learn that they were spelled breeches. But these bloom late March to early May, so they do bloom a little bit earlier than squirrel corn does. They are more common to see than squirrel corn. So again, same thing, seeds dispersed by ants. To me, if you don't have the look of the flower, because the flower does look pretty distinctive, Dutchman's breeches will have little yellow bits or yellow petals on the bottom of them. They grow on their own little stalk coming out of the plant, whereas squirrel corn tends to be more clustered. They're not quite doing that lean over. But yeah, they can get tricky, and most of the time around here you're seeing Dutchman's breeches, but it is possible to find squirrel corn. Harbinger of spring. These are already up. I saw some just recently. So these guys bloom in late February to mid-April, so they are first. Sometimes they're called salt and pepper because they look like they've been salted and peppered. You'll find them in moist, well-shaded woodlands. Usually you'll find them along streams and creeks. And they are pollinated by teeny tiny little native bees and flies. So they are one of the earliest food sources for the very early bugs. And they're in the parsley family, which you can kind of see in their leaves that they look parsley-ish. Hepatica is a fun little one. I would personally call that color purple and not white, but that's just me. You'll see these early March through late April, so here pretty soon. Usually you'll find them in like well-established nutrient-rich woods. because they bloom so early, same thing as harbinger of spring, they're very early, very important early food source. And you can even have, because they'll form little colonies, you'll have different flower colors within the same colony. So they can be purple, white, blue, all kinds of spectrum of colors. And they are in the buttercup family of flowers. Rue anemone and false rue anemone. So we've got rue anemone, which blooms in mid-March through early May. You'll find them in rich floodplains. You can even find them or up in the dry uplands. So they like it where it's wet and where it's dry. They're pretty well spread out. They have, there's certain medicinal properties in their roots that can be used to treat digestive upsets, which is pretty nice. I'm not entirely sure how I think you have to prepare it a certain way. They don't produce nectar. They only produce pollen. So they're almost tricksters. But some small bees will actually use the pollen to help kind of set up their nests. And there are some flies that actually eat the pollen. So they are providing something. They just don't produce nectar. And then you have false rue anemone, which, as you can see, looks very, very similar. False rue anemone blooms March through May. You'll find them in the floodplain. So if you're in an upland, it's going to be rue anemone. You're not going to find false rue anemone where it's dry. But false rue anemone will almost always have 5 sepals here, and will have alternate leaves going down. So the leaves will come out taking turns down the stem. So they do have technically sepals and not petals. The actual flower is in the middle here, a bunch of little flowers in the middle. But it's usually an arrangement of 5. Rue anemone always has more than 5. And then our last 2 super fun ones, skunk cabbage, which are blooming as we speak. These are our earliest blooming wildflowers every year here in Ohio. They'll bloom starting blooming in mid-February. They'll last through April. And they are stinky. So the bloom will sit kind of on the floor. It's like down on the ground. And it's just a nice rich purple with like an opening in it. You'll usually find them in wetlands, like spring-fed wetlands. They like bogs, they like fens, anywhere that's really wet and moist and a lot of water going on. And then later in the season, they have these big leaves that and the leaves are enormous. They're like the size of my leg. They're very tall. But if you break them up, they are stinky. So really cool one to see. Definitely worth taking a drive out to wherever you get reports of them. And last but not least, we've got twin leaf. So twin leaf shows up late March through mid-April, so here pretty soon. They like really rich woods. They're called twin leaf because their leaves are twins. They have these identical leaves on them. And they are not technically a spring ephemeral because they stay active throughout the summer. So they bloom in the spring, but you'll find their leaves all throughout the summer, and they're still actively doing photosynthesis and producing chlorophyll all season long. But they are another one who are seed dispersed mainly by ants. So now you've heard all of these amazing wildflowers that we have. I will tell you, just putting this presentation together, I'm now so excited to go find spring wildflowers. I was going through photos and things, and I was like, oh yeah, we have that one, and like, oh, that one's so cool. So a few of my favorite places to go find spring wildflowers. One is Sycamore Park and Wilson Nature Preserve. That's part of our park system. It's over in Batavia. There, we actually have a trail called the Wildflower Loop in Wilson. Great spot to see trout lily, bluebells, nodding trillium, toadshade trillium, all kinds of really fun wildflowers there. And the Wildflower Loop is pretty easy to get to. It's about, I think, maybe a half of a mile total, like round trip. It's not a very far walk. Klingman Park, another part of our park system. It's also in Batavia, but it's more towards Owensville. Really good spot for wildflowers. Look, so much trout lily. If you ever want to like almost get tired of looking at trout lily, come here. There's a lot of it. It's amazing. And there's a few other fun surprises of wildflowers here as well. If you want to see skunk cabbage specifically, Glen Helen Nature Preserve up in Yellow Springs has skunk cabbage every year. Every year I go say hi to it. Then they have a lot, and it's very close to their boardwalk, so you get a really good look at it too. California Woods Nature Preserve is a really good spot for large colonies of wildflowers. So because it is an old growth forest, you will see that slow succession of wildflowers in huge patches. Because a lot of these wildflowers, especially ones that like their seed dispersed by ants don't move super far. So it can take these wildflowers a long time to build these big patches. And because the California woods has had that time, you get to see these really cool big patches. Another one, if you want to see, I think it's over 30 species of wildflowers in one spot, including a rare one called Shooting Star. Bulls Run Nature Sanctuary is up in Middletown. It's a little, I think, 10-acre, 11-acre nature preserve, but they have a lot of wildflowers, different spring wildflowers up there. So it's a good spot to go check them out. But like I said, if you want to check out, you're like, I really want to see hepatica, go on iNaturalist, look up hepatica. It'll show you where it's been spotted in this region. But with that, if anybody has any